In the last video, we talked about the city center and how we can move the city center by shifting the land value. In this video, we will be talking about another completely different land value mechanic in this game. As with the 2x2 tiling grid that I showed you in the last video, there's actually another invisible grid that you can't see in this game that the game is actually using to do other calculations. And this is a 4x4 grid. So in the top part of this map, I bulldozed all the forests and made this grid with the park. The park is not doing anything physically here. It is just here to help represent the 4x4 grid. You start in any of the corners of the map, and then you can make this tiling pattern. If I were to go all the way to the end of the map here, it would work out perfectly as far as fitting in this map. The tiling, that is. Likewise, if I went all the way down. Anyway, there's this other 4x4 tiling grid that the game uses to make other computations. In this video specifically, we're going to talk about how those computations affect GIFs. Back in the day, one of the most original strategies was to place a gift, which I'm going to just pretend this police department is a gift, and then put blocks around it. And this would be known as a donut block with a gift in the center. Remember that? To this day, this is still one of the most important strategies in the game. However, over the years, the way to implement them has changed significantly. One way is how the gift spreads land value to the zone surrounding it in the donut block. For the first example, I am going to place one of these gifts that I got on the map, and then I'm going to surround it with residential zones, right? I'm going to build a power plant somewhere by it so I can give it some power. And I'm also going to provide some valid destinations for these residential zones. So the way I'm going to do that is just build some commercial zones around it. It's not pretty, but for the sake of this example, it's sufficient enough. Like this, like this, like this, and like this. We will provide it power and see what happens. Bulldoze these schools and hospitals to get houses. Now, as it's developing, what do you notice? Well, the thing you should notice immediately is we made a donut block and put residential zones around it, but they did not all become highs. We have some highs, we have some uppers, and we have some mids. Now recall, going through my 900K city that we've looked at many times, you might have noticed that where all my gifts were, all of the zones around it were highs, which then became tops. But in this case, that didn't happen. Now, the first thing you might argue or think about is what we talked about in the last video, where the city center has the highest land value, and since I have this stuff in the bottom right, and I have this here, then perhaps the city center is more like right here, and this donut block is far away from it. But that doesn't explain why we got two random R highs 2 random are uppers, and then the rest are mids. If this was really far away from the city center, wouldn't these all not develop very well? Or would they all just be mids? There's an explanation for why I got all highs and this did not. And it actually has nothing to do with the city center. You see, gifts work as follows, which I'm going to show you over here. I will only get all highs to develop around it if and only if the gift is placed in such a way that it is on top of 4 different squares in this 4x4 tiling grid. For example, if I were to place a gift here right now, it is only on this one square. If I move it over like this, it is only on top of 2 different squares. It might be touching this square right here, but it has to be on top of it. If I put the gift here, notice that it is on top of 4 different squares. If you put a gift on top of 4 different squares, you are guaranteed to get all highs around that gift. So let's try it out. If I put this gift here, surround it with zones, okay? And if I were to keep fast forwarding here, they would eventually all come together as tops. And look at that. 4 tops out of 1 donut block. Now, if we were to look at the land value map, you will notice that the square comprising of the donut block has really high land value, even though it's in the corner of the map. Think of gifts as giving such land value for free. All of these zones up here are still being used in the calculation for the city center. However, you can get away with having residential zones in poor areas like this because of gifts. Gifts provide free high land value to all the zones surrounding it. And if we were to do a little quick math here, there are 28 gifts that you can get in this game, not including landfills. Well, if I can get 4 tops in each gift, and there are 28 gifts, then your population from just donut blocks alone is going to be 215,040 residents. That is almost halfway to a megalopolis. So what I'm doing here is purposefully making another situation just to keep in mind that you're most likely going to see many times during your build. But sometimes when you are building your tops, they will form like this. It is a really easy fix. You definitely want to get as many tops as you can, since tops hold more population. So if you ever get a situation like this, you can just do a little tweaking and bulldoze, let's say, this zone here, so that we can get these 2 to make a top, and then these 2 to make a top. And we get our other top back. So again, you should always do that anytime you're making donut blocks. If you only get 3 tops, do a little bulldozing so that you can get 4 tops instead. The next thing I'd like to talk about is how exactly you should lay out your donut blocks. One of the easiest things to remember when doing donut block building is once you established or have established a donut block with a gift in it, the best way to proceed with your other donut blocks is to build exactly 3 spaces away from the donut block you just made. So, 1, 2, 3. If I were to move 3 spaces over and build another donut block like this, there's a couple things we can notice here. The first one is where we're going to put the gift at. Notice that there's 4 different squares that it's going to be on top of, which means all of these zones are going to be highs. As it turns out, if you were to keep repeating this pattern, 3 spaces in between, you will always get 4 different squares inside for the gift to fall on top of. And so this will become all highs. This is pretty nice. You don't have to figure out exactly where every gift needs to place with high precision. You just need to place 1, and then 3 spaces over, the other one's guaranteed to have the right placement. This works if you go down from here. This also works if I go down from here and to the right. So as long as you go adjacent to the gift you just built and put 3 spaces in between, then you should be good to go. Another nice property of this layout is you can fit zones in between the donut blocks. Being able to fit zones between the donut blocks means you can pack in more population. You can imagine if this didn't work, and rather than 3 spaces, if we had, let's say, 2 spaces in between, this is really inefficient because there's all this space between these zones that we're not using to build anything. And if we're 4 spaces away, then we would definitely be able to fit zones in between, but then you have like this extra space here that we are wasting. Now, it doesn't seem like that much space we're wasting, but if you can imagine 28 donut blocks with that space in it, then you put all that extra space that we lost combined, and it does lose a significant amount of extra space. So having 3 spaces in between is just right for this situation here. So where exactly should you put your donut blocks at? Well, you don't want to put them in the center of the map. The center of the map will have the highest land value when you are finished building your city. So if you fill the whole map in, the city center will be somewhere right here. But if donut blocks provide free high land value, why would you want to put them in a place that is going to have high land value anyway? See what I'm saying? So rather than put them in the center of the map, what you want to do is line them up around the edges of the map. The edges of the map have lower land value, but again, if you place your gift in the right spot, then you're essentially getting all free highs, no matter where it is. It doesn't matter how much crime or low land value is up here, the gift is providing enough land value, as you can see in this picture, to sustain it. So all residential donut blocks should be along the edges of the map here. The donut blocks I have here happen to be built in such a way that it's optimum. But to be more precise, how close to the edges should you align them? Well, it depends what edge we're talking about. If we're talking about the left and the top edge, you should leave enough space such that you can put a zone and track in between. Zone, track in between, like this. If you are building on the right or bottom edge, then most of the time you want to leave 2 zones and a track worth of space. 2 zones and a track worth of space before building your donut blocks, like so. Now obviously you might be looking at these placements and wondering why we're placing them the way we are on all the edges of the map. The bottom and the right edge will be fairly self-explanatory. You see, I told you before that when you're starting your build, you want to start on the right or bottom edge of the map, right? Well, if you do that, then you should be able to get lots of commercial tops aligned on the edge. But since this zone here in the commercial top doesn't need track, you could essentially do this, really, and line up all these commercial tops along the edges of the map to pack in as much as you can, right? We can take advantage of how a top functions with transportation and pack as much as we can in. And then we can get the residential zones as close as possible. The residential donut blocks are as close to the edge as possible, while also taking advantage of the fact that we can get as many commercial tops as possible here. Likewise, right here too, for the same reasoning. Make sense? And as you're building out and getting to the left and top edges, your zone placement is going to go from 2 to just 1 column and 1 row of zones like this. And again, we talked about this in a previous video, how you don't want to do this because the left zone of a commercial top would need rail. But then if that needed rail, you couldn't really squish them in like this. So what you want to do instead is you want to build like this. And then you get the residential donut blocks as close as possible to these left and top edges like I have here. There are a couple reasons why we don't want to push the donut blocks all the way to the edge of the map. I'm going to show you the first reason. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do just that. I'm going to push this donut block to the edge of the map. And I'm going to grab one of my other GIFs that I have here. Let's go ahead and use the fire department headquarters. I'm going to give it power. And I will give valid destinations and show you what it looks like here in a little bit. Okay, so as you can see, I have a donut block being built. I have to actually not build a residential zone here yet because this needs a valid destination first. So that is why I don't have a residential zone here yet. If you get a top here, then you could destroy this commercial zone and put a residential zone because then this wouldn't need rail. But let's just fast forward now and see if we can catch. See it? Look at that. Look at this top. And look what just happened to it. Well, as it turns out, there's another strange bug in this game where if you try getting a top to form on the top edge of the map, this only happens on the top edge, then what will happen is it will try and top, but then it reverts back to 2R highs. Again, this only works if the zone is on the very top edge of the map. Okay. If I were to shift this residential donut block down 1 unit, then these would top. You can also make this happen for a vertical top too. The animation's a bit different. You can actually see the whole R top form, but it doesn't sustain itself. So you can imagine how if you built all your donut blocks on the top edge of the map, then all the tops adjacent to the top edge would never form a top. So you don't want to push your donut blocks on the very edge of the map. If you do that, then you're going to run into this glitch in the game where it can't make tops on the top edge of the map. Your follow-up question to this might be, okay, if the glitch only happens on the top edge, then would building on any other edge be okay? Like this? The answer is yes, but it still is not optimal to do that. Okay? You won't get a weird bug going on when these try to top. So what I'd like to do next is show you through these two residential tops why you don't want to build on the very edge of the map regardless of where it is. Now these are on the top edge, and you know that you don't want to build there because of the bug that I just showed you. But for the sake of example, I'm just going to build here. And what I'm going to show you would apply to any edge of the map. Okay? So just for a little bit, let's just pretend that these donut blocks can form tops on the top edge, just for this example. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bulldoze some of these and put industrial zones. You're not putting industrial zones actually in this donut block. The only reason I'm doing that is so that we can visualize the top better. Okay, so this is a residential top, residential top, residential top, and so forth. I'm going to go ahead and bulldoze all of these and make this tiling as well, like this. Again, these would all be tops, but sometimes I did this when building as a visual cue, just to help me when planning. We will put a police department here, but let's just pretend that's a gift, okay? Now, if I were to build this way, one thing you'll notice is that, okay, I have to get a valid destination to these two zones here, especially this one, because this zone has no rail to it. So these two have to be a top. If they weren't, then this zone would never develop. So I could put rail like this, right? And just a quick reminder, if you were in this situation, you would have to destroy this top, you would have to destroy this zone, get this to develop into a top first, and then replace this. But once I get here, you could argue, yeah, I could build a zone there, which is nice. But notice that I can't build a zone here. And the reason I can't build a zone here is because then this doesn't have a valid destination. So a simple fix would be to just move it down like this and do that. Everything looks really nice here, but the problem is what's going on between these zones. You see, while this does work technically, if these were highs and together, then you would have had a chance to make a commercial top between them, right? And a commercial top holds more population. But if you were to keep repeating this tiling pattern, you will notice that it's always going to be stuck. Oops. It's always going to be stuck in the same exact pattern, like this. And the reason it's going to be stuck in the same exact pattern is because while these could be a top, I can't do that because these can't become tops because this would not have access to rail. Does that make sense? Here's an example on the left edge where these two needed to have a valid destination, which I could put here. But then I couldn't put a commercial zone adjacent to it because these two, let me just make this more noticeable. These two, or this residential top needs a valid destination, which would have to be right here somewhere, which would not allow these commercial zones to be together, which would get rid of your chances of possibly getting a commercial top there. I want to reiterate that for the left, the bottom, and the right edge of the map, you're not doing anything inherently wrong if you build this way. But if you're trying to get the highest population you possibly can, this is not the most efficient way to do it. Okay, what I would like to talk about next is residential donut block placement with respect to the edges of the map. You might be thinking, well, you just told me I should have it spaced out like this on the left and top edges of the map. And I should ideally have it spaced out like this and like this for the right and the bottom edges of the map. However, there's a very subtle thing that we want to be careful not to do when building our layout like this. Okay, so I've fixed and bulldozed some commercial zones here to lay them out different. Let's ignore these spaces. Remember, this is just for example. So what you don't want to do is have your edges exactly in line with your residential blocks or your residential zones. What does that mean? Well, notice that this commercial zone is exactly in line with this residential zone, right? But do you notice, like right here, this commercial zone is not in line with a residential zone over here? It's still adjacent or next to the residential block, but it's not, let's say, right here where it's adjacent to exactly one zone. It kind of like is in between them like this. Makes sense? When you are putting your donut blocks and your edges down, you want to make sure that you have your edges and your donut blocks offset. You do not want them to be lined up like this. This is more or less another optimization technique. It's not going to hurt you necessarily if you have them like this. But all of these optimizations that I've showed you so far in these tutorial videos put together is going to give you substantially higher population. It's important to not overlook these small things that I'm showing you because putting them together will make a big difference. Okay, so if I build my donut blocks like this, they are spaced correctly, and I'll put a police department to pretend it's a gift. Everything looks pretty well, but I want to focus on this in-between space again. Remember when we had these on the edges of the map, we were not able to take advantage of the in-between space well, or very well. If we have these commercial zones aligned with these residential donut blocks, then I would say to myself, oh look, this has a valid destination up here. Okay, so I could put a commercial zone here, right? Makes sense? And then I could say, oh wait, if I put a commercial zone here, I might be able to get a C top. But you can't do that in this situation, because if you did, then this zone here would not have rail. Make sense? And so you would have to move it down here so that this has a valid destination like this, which is a similar situation to what we have here. However, there is a fix that you could do to get away with not changing your donut blocks. And the fix would have normally been bulldoze this rail to move this all up so that you have space here to give this top a valid destination, right? Well, the problem with doing that is this zone here does not have any rail to it. And you can't make these two a top because it's on the top edge. This is the problem that we're running into here. The problem is there is a solution to giving this transportation, but it gets rid of transportation to another commercial zone up on this edge. However, I want you to notice this. If they were not aligned like this, and instead offset, what do you notice about the top edge of the map now? Well, you should notice that now this zone does have rail, and this zone has rail too. All of these zones have rail. So the reason we offset these zones is if I need to cram in as many zones as possible, I will never have to necessarily worry about pushing some of these zones against the commercial zones and or industrial zones on the edge, because being offset means somewhere they're going to be able to get rail. Whereas if they weren't offset and they were all aligned with the donut blocks, then I could never do this. I can never push them onto the edge because it would always create this problem. Make sense? Being able to push these commercial zones up also means I can actually fit another zone in between the donut blocks, and it's not sticking out. So I could fit up to 3 zones between donut blocks if I were to able to stick or push this commercial zone a little higher up. But the only way you can do that is if your commercial zones are offset like this. And if they're offset, everything has a destination, transportation, and we're good. You will run into a similar problem with the right and the bottom edge of the map. Okay, so if I were to, real quick, 1, 2, 3, build like this, and then I actually line up these commercial tops like this. If I were to set something up like this, then I would have to say that I can't do this because then this wouldn't get a valid destination. So, but then I could say, well, look, if I could just push this down like this, then I could give it a valid destination. But the problem you would run into again is then this wouldn't have any transportation. Jumping to my city here, I just wanted to show you physically the offsetting. So notice that this bottom edge, all these zones are offset with the donut blocks. And likewise, this right edge is offset. This top edge is offset. They're not exactly aligned. And this this left edge is offset. But another thing I wanted to show you is these right and bottom edges. So one advantage of offsetting with the right and the bottom edge as well is notice that I have certain columns pushed up. The reason for doing this is because I couldn't get these to be commercial tops, right? And so the bottom zone needed track. So what I was able to do is take the two commercial zones that were normally lined with the bottom and actually move them up one. You don't need all of the track going all the way across like this, okay? You only need enough track to give valid destinations to all your zones and transportation. So you can take advantage of this and move things up into it, like I said. Here's this example here that I talked about in the other save state is I was able to get more packed in here by moving these up being exactly adjacent to this top edge. And I was still able to give this industrial zone transportation. But you can move these bottom and right edges up like this wherever you can't get a commercial zone to develop or a commercial top to develop. And notice that everything works out just fine. This still gets a valid destination. This still has transportation. And this still has transportation. So everything still has transportation when I do that. So this offsetting technique can be figured out at the very beginning of your build. I always start in the bottom right, and so I can get my donut block placement offset immediately with my commercial zones. The next thing I'd like to talk about is a situation you might run into while building the edges of the map. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build just a donut block in this corner. Notice anything different with this donut block? Well, you should. We don't have all highs. And the first thing you might say is, well, it must be because of these industrial zones. And you're right. This is not becoming a high because of these industrial zones. But didn't I just tell you earlier in the video that they will always develop in the highs? And the answer is they will. But the problem here is the pollution lowered the land value of this top half of the donut block just enough to where this wouldn't be able to become a high. There's a simple fix to this. If you temporarily bulldoze the industrial zones, then rebuild the residential zone and let it develop, and then fix your donut blocks like that, like I showed you earlier, and then put your industrial zones in, you're going to notice that the residential zones on the top are going to be okay. This is fairly close to the left half of this residential donut block where all the calculations are being done. And this industrial is pretty close to the top half of this residential top where all the calculations are being done. But notice they're okay. As long as they're in a gift donut block, they will not succumb to industrial pollution like this. There might be extreme cases where if you literally put them all next to each other and surround this whole donut block with all industrial zones touching like this, then yeah, you might be able to make them not completely invincible, but you're never going to do that. And so here's a case where you can actually have industrial zones by residential zones because all of these are protected by the high land value of the gift. And you notice that the pollution created this little yellow, but it's not enough to revert the residential donut block back. So you don't have to worry about that. Again, in extreme cases, you might be able to do this, but you will never run into those extreme cases. So you never have to worry about it. I've never ran into those really extreme cases. And remember, too, your goal is to get as many commercial zones on the edges anyway, so you likely won't have 7 or 8 industrial zones lined up in a row. They'll be spaced with commercial zones, which will spread out the pollution. The final part of this video is going to talk about gift placement. Now, when I say gift placement this time, I mean like literally the gift. You know you're supposed to put it in a donut block, and you know that you have to put the gifts in a certain spot on the map in order for them to become all highs. Out of the 28 gifts that you can build with donut blocks, there's going to be 4 gifts that I'm going to say will require your attention. You can place the other gifts anywhere you want in your donut blocks, okay? There's no rules. You can do whatever you want. You could have your 3 large parks next to each other. You could have one here and one up here. It really doesn't matter. You can line up your fire department headquarters all together. You can make whatever patterns you want with your gifts around the edge. But I'm going to say that there's going to be 4 gifts that you need to be careful with. 3 of them is going to be the same gift 3 times, and one of them is actually probably one of the first gifts you get, and that is your house. The house gift is a really oddball gift because when you build it, it evolves as your city evolves. So each time your city goes up a level, village, town, city, capital, metropolis, megalopolis. So those are the stages. Your house will change and get larger and more fancier. But unfortunately, there's a weird mechanical mechanism when it comes to developing zones that they also incorporated with these house levels. If you are at the first stage of the house and you place your zones down around it after your gift has been placed properly, so this gift has been placed on top of 4 different squares here. Do you notice that some of these zones are not highs? Yet the gifts should always provide all highs if you place them in the right spot. Well, for some reason, the house gift doesn't want to behave quite like the other gifts. If we take a look at the land value here, whoa, that's not a nice orange-ish, reddish square. So what's going on here? Well, if the house is at the first stage, it will not have the same land value giving effects as the other gifts. It's a little silly, to be honest. But the good news is, as soon as your house goes up a level, it will provide those effects. So you just need to get your house to develop by 1 level, which is not hard. Going from town to city is not a hard thing to do at all. So the house gift's pretty important. What you want to do is actually place it or know where the home of the house gift is going to be at and place it there as soon as possible, and then give it power. You don't have to make a donut block around it, but you're doing that so that as your city progresses, it will increase it will go up stages. Because if you get to, let's say, a megalopolis and you haven't built the house gift, it will always start at the first stage. But since your megalopolis is like the final stage of the building process, then your house will never go up a stage. Makes sense? So it's important to get this gift done as soon as possible. That is why in my city here, when I started in the bottom right, I had this gift placed early with power so that it would develop out of the first stage as soon as possible. You don't have to put the house gift right here per se. You can put it wherever you want. So I said there are 3 other gifts other than the house that you might want to think about as far as placement goes. It happens to be the police department headquarters. Now, why the police department headquarters? You know, the house has this weird mechanic, so it's understandable why we kind of want to get that down. I don't want to put a police department headquarters in this corner, right? Because none of these zones around it care about high crime. The edges are just commercials and industrial zones, and the donut block is free land value to get all highs. So putting a police department here is not really helping you out. You're just putting it in the corner where it isn't going to really help you, where you can't take advantage of the police department headquarters effects, right? So you might be saying, okay, well, then I should just, as long as I place it somewhere else other than these corners, then it should be okay, right? It wouldn't hurt to put it here in these edge donut blocks. However, remember that the corners of the map have the lowest land value. And I just told you not to put the police department headquarters in a corner, but you should put it in the corner that's nearest to all the other zones I haven't talked about here. So I talked about these outer edges, which we don't care about. And I talked about these donut blocks here, which we don't care about. But look at the gray area. This strange gray area where it's not exactly in the city center, but it's not on these edges of the map. It's like the outer ring for the city center. You should align these police department headquarters in a donut block as close as you can to those parts of the map. You could put it here as well, but I say since the corner has the worst land value, I'm trying to align my police department headquarters more in the corners, but not the very back part of the corner. Just kind of like right here near the corner. And likewise, I have my police department headquarters here aligned as well. Remember, out of all the gifts that you get, the police and fire department headquarters have a secondary effect. We don't really care about the secondary effect of the fire department headquarters because we don't care about disasters. And if a disaster were to happen, you're saving the game state so you can go back to the previous state where it wasn't destroyed. So that's why you can place the fire department headquarters anywhere you want on the map. Like I kind of just randomly put them over here. But the police department headquarters secondary effect is really nice because it provides a lot better police coverage than a regular police department. So if you put it in these back corners, you're not going to be able to take advantage of that because chances are all the zones around it don't care about the coverage it gives. So I placed these police department headquarters close to the outer ring of the city center. They're always placed, for me, in these donut blocks that would be kind of not along the edge, but kind of catty corner from these corner ones like this. See that? Now you only get 3 police department headquarters, so that's why there's nothing here. And the way with map 137, the way it's laid out is this is all water. So I put them in the other 3 corners instead. So just to kind of go down here, This police department headquarters is in a donut block, but I'm using it to spread its coverage out here as much as I can. And again, the police coverage is more for the residential zones, like these, for example. So I'm taking advantage of what it has to offer me. And then if I go to this one here, again, if I had put it here, then I'm not really taking advantage of it all that much. But if I put it here, then I'm helping this R-top sustain being an R-top because I'm lowering the crime around it. Likewise, all the zones around it, like these here. So I'm doing my best to use the secondary effect of the police department headquarters. Again, if you place it like in these spots here, I wouldn't say it's a bad thing, but I like to think that the corners of the map have the worst land value, and lower land value means harder to develop as is. And so if you decrease crime, you're going to prevent the land value from going even lower. And again, this effect is only for your residential zones adjacent to it. We will be discussing police coverage a little more in another video. But for now, you should just remember that you should place your police departments primarily, or your police department headquarters primarily near, not necessarily in, but near the corners of the map. But I'll bring these police department headquarters up again alongside police coverage again in a different video.